really delighted that you've been able to join us here this evening, and we trust that this short time that we spend together will be a real comfort and a real blessing and something very special for you at this time of year. One of the things that strikes me tonight, looking around, each one of us has got a story, and each one's story is unique to them. That story is made up of things like your background, your experiences, and maybe what's going on in your life right now. But each one of us has an individual story. And it is the confidence that we have as Christians that God recognizes that. And he knows us and he understands us in our particular story, which may include, as we've acknowledged here this evening, struggle and difficulty. We are very conscious as a church that there are many people for whom Christmas can be a tough time. Maybe it just brings into sharp focus things that we struggle with throughout the year, but there's something about Christmas that makes those struggles all the more poignant. I can remember my own struggles a few years ago. It was 2007. My father had passed away the end of October, and I remember that first Christmas. In many ways, you couldn't really have made it up. There'd been a very bad incident locally, and some young people had been hurt. And I was quite involved in visiting them each day and trying to support them and the families in the hospital. It immediately made a very necessary intrusion into my Christmas. But because it was the first Christmas without my dad, we decided that we would have my mum come and stay. And of course, she wasn't in the best of moods really to make merry at Christmas, but being a family and because we love one another, we understood that. And we just wanted it to be special for her and make sure that she felt recognized and not forgotten about. Well, Christmas Day came. There were all the struggles, the usual busyness that ministers have at this time of year. Mum was with us, not particularly feeling like celebrating. And to cap it all, on Christmas Day, my wife went down with the mother of all tonsillitis. And so I had to take her to casualty on Christmas Day. And I began to feel very, very sorry for myself. There were two things, though, that really helped me that Christmas. I was left to make the Christmas dinner. I've never made Sunday lunch, let alone Christmas dinner. But one of the things that stuck with me, that despite the sense of loss and obvious sorrow that my mum was feeling, she still says to this day, they were the best roast potatoes she's ever had in her life. How I did it, I don't know. But the other thing that really struck me was that in the midst of loss and genuine sorrow and a feeling of just life was pretty tough, I began to glimpse and see in a very simple way just how powerful and how downright realistic the account is of Jesus' birth. Now that's my little story, and how Christmas, in all honesty, has never quite been the same for me since then. And you'll have your own story. But in the readings which we had tonight, we were reminded of two really powerful incidents. The first, if you remember, there was that picture of the young girl there. It's an artistic impression of Mary, that moment when the angels come to her. And often it's depicted in very high tones, high ways in art and things like that, as a very powerful and joyful occasion. But the Bible actually records in the middle of when the angel came to her that Mary was greatly troubled at his words. I think that was reflected in the painting. Confusion and troubled. The second reading which we had, which you probably remember, was the moment when the angels came to the shepherds. There they are, down-to-earth fellas, minding their own business, when suddenly heaven, the curtain, if you like, is pulled back, and they glimpse something of heaven. And interestingly, we're told there that when the angel of the Lord appeared to them and the glory of the Lord shone around them, they were terrified. Mary was greatly troubled. The shepherds were terrified. Now, the reality is, in our struggles and in our difficulties, this is often our experience. We can feel overwhelmed, and we can feel broken down by the pressures around us. But what is amazing is that the words that followed to Mary and the words that followed to the shepherds are full of reassurance and full of comfort. In particular to the shepherds, don't be afraid, the angel says, in response to their fear. It's good news. It's hope. Mary's story, the shepherd's story, and your story. Maybe there's a sense where they come together even here tonight. But central to this account of Jesus' birth is, of course, God's story. For that's what the Christmas story is all about. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. This is the wonder, this is the glory, and this is the power and the comfort of the Christmas story. That to Mary, in her trouble of hearing what the angel had to say to her, the shepherds overwhelmed by the glimpse of glory, and more importantly for you tonight, maybe you in your own struggles and your own awareness of difficulty at this time of year, there is the news from heaven that Jesus, who has come to us, is God with us. God with us. Not to condemn us, not to criticize us, not to shake us and tell us simply to get on with living, but God with us in the reality of our struggles and in the reality of our troubles. There's a carol which we sometimes sing at Christmas, and it includes these words. He was little, weak and helpless, tears and smiles like us he knew. It's actually highly profound, those words. What it's saying is that God, who is with us, came into our world as one of us, and he experienced the total reality of what it means to be a human being living in this world. He understood suffering. He knew what it was to weep at the loss of a friend. He knew what it was to be rejected and despised and called a man of sorrows. And you might say, why would God want to be with us and go through all that rubbish and all that suffering? And the great reason the Bible gives us is that he loves us. And his love isn't simply to sit down next to us in our sufferings and say, you're not alone, I'm here. That's wonderful. But his love actually takes him further than that. His love would one day take him to the cross, to die for us, so that we could have the hope of new life and peace with God. All those wonderful things that the angels sang to the shepherds about. And so this Christmas, whatever your story is, whatever your struggle is, don't forget the story of Jesus' birth is not some traditional sentimental story, but it's the Bible's news that God has come into our world. He has come to us as one of us, and he has come here to be with us, to comfort, to heal, to save, and to restore. And so our prayer for you this Christmas, and we will continue to pray for you during the year, is that you might find hope, comfort, and strength in trusting yourself and your sorrows to Jesus Christ, whose love for you is indescribable and whose mercy and grace is at your disposal. Well, we're going to sing now to close this service. We trust that you have found it this time of reflection and being reminded of the Christmas story, a comfort to you. As Rebecca said, if you would like to chat to anyone and maybe you'd like us to pray with you, we'd be delighted to do that. If you simply would just like to stay and have a few mince pies and a nice cup of tea, that's absolutely wonderful. But after we've sung this, I'll close in prayer and we'll have that opportunity to spend some time together.